Hey friends, Kevin Duragi. Welcome to the Kevin Duragi Show. I am your host, Kevin Duragi. Hey, who knew that? So today, our guest today is Scott Krusemark. So Scott, he's out of the Ohio group, Ohio REIAs. Ohio is a state full of very strong REIA groups. But a lot of our conversations today tie into how he got started and how he came about. But one of the big things I really like here, so when we talk about our three main tenets, right? Most important real estate is between your ears, your personal drives your professional, and it's all about relationships. His main battle, especially learning to find the key, was actually in his brain. So he found out later, maybe 8 years ago, that he has Asperger's. I didn't pick it up the first time I was chatting with him, but it was one of those if-then scenarios in his brain. Like he didn't pick up social cues and things like that. But the way he was able to kind of evolve into real estate, evolve in his relationship with his wife, with other people, and now he's a coach, he's an investor, he's a hard money lender, he does all these things, and he's in the leadership team of some of the Ohio REIA groups. So it is fascinating to see how all this happened, but it all started really, I think, when he was 5 and started wanting to fix himself because he felt like he was broken mentally. So, gosh, what a great story, great conversation. Let's go start that conversation with Scott. Hey friends, it's Kevin Duragi. Welcome to the Kevin Duragi Show. Today I have a special guest, which is Scott Krusemark. So Scott is out of Ohio, actually the Canton area of Ohio, and is highly into the leadership and the REIAs out there. If you don't know this, Ohio is like super big in the REIA space, right? So they have a huge event called the OREIA. All their REIAs, which are the real estate investment. Actually, Scott, what does REIA stand for?
Real Estate Investor Association.
I was going to get there.
right. So the two that I'm actively involved locally are the Akron REIA, which is AC REIA, and then Stark County, which is the Canton REIA, which is SC REIA. And then they're both nonprofits, and there are 13 or 14 in the state of Ohio that are underneath an umbrella organization called OREIA, Ohio REIA. Interestingly enough, Ohio REIA now has some affiliates in Florida and North Carolina. So it's becoming somewhat national.
Yeah. So like in Missouri, we have, I think we have a sprinkling of REIAs, but we have a lot of meetups.
Yeah.
So meetups are more for-profit. Yeah.
We have a few of those too.
That's awesome. But you guys really have a strong community out there. So it takes good leadership for people to stick around in that. So Scott, let's rewind to the beginning here. So how did Scott get involved in real estate? How did that happen?
So I read the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Great book. Love the book. Robert Kiyosaki. And if you haven't read it, you absolutely positively want to read it. It's a great why book. Why you want to do this. Not so good on the how part. Okay? So I read the book, and my wife read it with me. We work together as basically as a partnership. She does the hard stuff, the taxes, the billing, and all the back office stuff.
Yeah.
And so we read this book and we said, hey, this sounds like a great idea. Let's go do it. So we found and I'm going to use the quotes here, a investor-friendly realtor. Yeah, investor-friendly to the seller. Anyway, so we looked at a bunch of houses, made offers on 6 of them. And anybody that knows in real estate knows that the next statement is in terrible shape. All 6 were accepted.
Oh, no.
Oops. We seriously overbid. We basically were paying the retail, the after repair value, as investors call it, not the calculated value. And so we turned 3 of them down, and we closed on 3 different properties, a 10-unit and 2 single families from 3 separate sellers, on the same day, having paid too much. And so we knew within about 6 weeks that we had made some mistakes. It did take us that long to actually figure it out.
Investor friendly, like
time
working with
right, yeah. We never bought anything more from her once we figured out what happened. The 10 unit was what eventually took us to bankruptcy.
Oh.
So that's a longer story. We got into real estate in 2002, got these 3 properties. By 2008, when the tsunami hit, we had 27 doors and 19 buildings. So the 10 unit plus duplex, and then the rest single family. So we focused on the single family. And the apartment building made giant sucking sounds. And in the bankruptcy, it got sold with a short sale. The bank, we actually called the bank and said, here's the keys. And they said, no, we won't take it. Just keep the heat on. Don't pay us. The bank said, don't pay us.
What?
Yeah, I know. Anyway, so they found a buyer, a short sale buyer. We had paid $160,000 for the building, which now is probably worth about $400,000. And anyway, so we had paid $160,000. The break even was 9 out of 10 apartments occupied, which means there's no cash flow. Because this was during a time when you could fog a mirror and buy a house, we never had it full. Literally 1 month we had all 10 units occupied. So the rest of the time we were losing money, and it had all sorts of deferred maintenance. The building itself was super solid. But anyway, so the buyer that bought the short sale paid $50,000 for this 10-unit building. Now, by that point in 2010 is when the buyer bought it. And by that point, I knew how to calculate the multifamily. He seriously overpaid at $50,000. He should have paid $1, or the bank should have paid him to take the building.
Oh man!
Because it's all about cash flow. How much money's coming in, how much money's going out, and when there's low occupancy, then it's all about you got to get the occupancy up, and so we were glad to get rid of it. Very glad to get rid of it. Anyway, so we got into real estate in 2002. We liked it. It was good long term. Once we understood what we were doing, which took a few houses to get the learning, and we got involved with the real estate groups, the OREIA convention. I still think that's the best real estate education you'll ever get. You get 35 speakers, 25 to 35 speakers, depending on the year. So we've been going since 2003 every year. It's that valuable.
Wow. So you say it's 35 speakers. They all come into one place for what, a weekend or something like that?
4 days. And most of the speakers are speaking an hour and a half time segment. But because Vina Jones-Cox, who organizes it, and you've heard of Vina.
Oh, she's
a force to be reckoned with, too.
Yeah.
But she organizes it and insists that the speakers actually present real information, and that they actually need to teach their program how much depth you can do in an hour and a half for at least an hour, and then they can do their upsell, because most of these have courses to sell. But you get some real education that way. And so every time I go, I learn something, and so it's worth it, and it's cheap.
So I've been to one of them, And I was on the, I was part of a software company at the time. But my family and I all went out. We're at the Great Wolf Lodge. Is it still there?
Yep, that's where it is. It does move around. It's been there for a while. And I think they may be moving it in the next 2 years or something. I think it's going to be there one more time, at least. And so, if you want to learn about Airbnbs, sure, you go in that session, you go, no, that ain't for me. That's too much property management. But that's what we decided.
Yeah, so. Totally agree with that. All right. So I'm just curious, Scott. So if you broke into real estate, you read the book, you want to do this, right? You got your investor-friendly agent. You got 3 properties, one being an 11 unit. You must have had W-2 or other income at this time. You weren't just sitting on your laurels. So.
Oh yeah. No, I was. I'm a computer consultant. I still am. That time it was full time. Now it's like 4 to 6 hours a week, and I love it. I mean, I get paid for playing, and and we had talked a little earlier about the fact that I have Asperger's, or had Asperger's. So one of the strengths of Asperger's is the ability to see systems. The more complex the system, essentially the easier it is, and which is opposite of what almost everybody else has. And so I can see the forest and the trees and be able to move back and forth, which of course is, those kind of characteristics are perfect for programmers. And I love that. And Scott, so
go back. Can you define what, because we haven't had this in any of our talks before. So define what Asperger's is for people who don't know.
So it's a designation that's no longer technically used. It's called on the spectrum because it's on the autism spectrum. It's a variant of the way the brain forms. So my brain formed that it's much more logical and be able to see systems, be able to see larger systems. So I can focus tremendously. So the characteristics of and I'll go back to the term because I think it separates out from what most people think of autism. I am high functioning, means that I am able to function in the world. I'm not the guy sitting in the corner just rocking. Okay. Yeah. That's also on the spectrum. It's a different portion of the spectrum. And it's just a different way the brain forms. So the diagnosis process is you look at you have a series of questions. Do you do this? Do you do this? Do you do this? And if you answer more than about 20 of 40 questions yes, then you're on the spectrum. So I took this little test and and there are 40 questions on the one I looked at because now there's about 60 or 80. Anyway, 40 questions. And it said if you have more than, I think it was 16, then you've got a form of Asperger's. I got 36. Yeah, it's like, now some of them are like right at the edge. It's like, yeah, I do that. And a lot of people have the characteristics. It's just that, it's like, can you deeply focus? Do you have trouble reading faces? I still have that one. So what I did was I said, okay, well, let's look at systems, which again, like I said, help with the programming aspects and the technology kind of things. And what are human beings? Just very complex systems. It's like, oh, I can deal with that. So I took the strength of Asperger's, which is the ability to see systems and be able to learn tools of how to deal with folks, and applied it to dealing with folks. I grew up in a broken household. I don't think of it that way. I think of it as I just grew up, in a normal household, but turns out that it wasn't all that functional. My father has serious Asperger's too, and it wasn't until later in life, for both of us actually, that we were able to take the aspects of Asperger's and work around them. So one of the characteristics of most autism and specifically Asperger's is the inability to talk to people. Can't read any kind of social cues, just absolutely incapable of communicating properly with people. A normal person, I want to use that term carefully because it's a full spectrum in the world, but if somebody goes, you can kind of read, normal people can read that and say, oh, I've overstepped my boundaries. Not an Asperger person. Just can't read it. It's not there. And so I had to learn that. So it's similar to learning a language. If you learn a language when you're 3, you're a native speaker. If you learn it when you're 20, you're translating. So everything I do in terms of interacting with other people, it's now become relatively natural, but I had to do it as a translation. So, when you're in the doctor's office, they have that little thing that says, a smiley face all to a serious pain thing that says, how much pain are you in from 1 to 10? Okay. Well, that's the way I think of the world. It's those pictures. Okay. So, this person has this, the smile and, the bright eyes. Obviously they're happy. Oh, this one is, so I have to translate. And so the face recognition stuff is still a little, I can translate fairly fast, but I'm still translating. So I don't get the nuances. So you get sarcasm. If it's verbal, I'm great. I don't have any issues with that. But if they're using their face to give that flip, I'm done. That's Asperger's.
Scott, it's interesting. So I have a friend who has Asperger's, also high functioning, but it's fun to watch him learn with me. So we were kind of, when you have friendly rivalries. So we were like that. So I am a highly sarcastic. I'm more of I pick up people's emotional cues, right? It's just one of those things. You're talking about facial pickups. I'm partially deaf, right? So I don't always hear. So I didn't know it, but to understand what you're saying, that's why I look at faces and eyes and, their body language. That's what I have to extract. I may not hear all your words, but I know what you're saying.
Right. I almost have the exact opposite, where I can hear better. I can hear things in the tones and such, and some body language, because that's still part of that same kind of visual recognition. But you're exactly right.
But it's funny because I'll say something, he'll be like, deadpan. He's like, that was a joke. Good one. It was one of those So the way you said it is translating. He was translating you were doing this. I got it. So. Yeah. But it is.
If you were to take me 20, 30 years ago, any kind of interaction we would have, I'd probably piss you off because I wouldn't read the social cues. I'd get off on a, technical discussion of, SpaceX or whatever.
Yep.
And you'd go,
So I don't know. Do you operate like this, Scott? So in our case, it'd be like, oh, what'd you think of the new Star Wars movie? And I was like, 2 hours of detailed, not notes, and you're like, oh man, it was supposed to be a lighthearted talk, but you gave me your dissertation on this opinion, which shame on me for asking. Did you have an answer that you thought about?
Right.
Is that also some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so the me now. When I say to people, and you went through the same thing when we first said it, is when I say I have Asperger's, almost everybody goes, no, you don't have that, because I've been able to take the strengths and apply them to the weaknesses, because there are some pretty strong weaknesses, this ability to not read social cues, and so I mean, one of the questions you asked earlier was about, how did I get to where I am? And part of the answer, because there's a lot of different pieces for me, I tend to be a lot of different kinds of answers for things, is that since I had to fix myself, I had to be able to start that process and work on the process of trying to interact with people where I didn't piss them off and they didn't piss me off. And so as I did that, working on myself, because I can't work on you, I can only work on me, I would learn a technique on myself. Well, I keep that in the tool belt. So then as a coach, now I can apply that tool to help somebody else. But all the tools started out as, figuring out how to take this person that's I consider broken. That's what I thought of myself as, and make it so that I was able to function. And I just kept doing that and doing that and doing that. And, every time I would have an interaction with somebody, and I think this is one of those tools, whenever I have an interaction with somebody that I felt was an inconsistent interaction. I mean, if I'm walking down a dark alley and I'm not afraid, that's an inconsistency. If I'm afraid, it's consistent. So I'll include emotions into the process. Or if I interact with somebody and it just something doesn't feel right, I call it a red flag. And then offline, maybe that night, maybe another time, I will then analyze that situation and try to find an equivalent situation in my early years. And I try to find the oldest one and pull that situation where the feelings are similar and try to pull that situation apart and say, what was happening in that situation where the response was that kind of feeling? And I would then rewrite the response. I wouldn't rewrite the facts of what happened. A typical example is my sister and I were playing. We had an old farmhouse that we were living in upstate New York, and they had wired the upstairs bedroom with a naked lamp or naked bulb. Okay, so the only way to turn it off was to unscrew it. Well, we wanted it dim, not dark. So, we're 4 or 5, something like that. And so we put some clothes over the top of it. It was perfect, right? And then went downstairs for some food. Well, we discovered the smoke had filled the upstairs. Okay. All right. That's the setup. All right. So the turns out one of the firemen lived right across the street from him. We actually knew him. Big burly guy. So here we are downstairs. They had finally kind of figured out what was going on. And he's there in this situation, kind of this overpowering kind of authority figure. And I'm scared big time. So I shut down. That was my response to this. So my rewrite, when I re-experienced this later, I've been through it a couple of times because each time through you can kind of clean up a bit of it, he was really trying to be very friendly, trying to not be intimidating. He got down on one knee and, was trying to talk to me at my level, and, I'm not responding that way. So the growth process, so this tool that I learned, is to go back to those situations and say, okay, well, what would be an appropriate response? I've got an adult sitting next to me that's, my parent, or me as now sitting next to that little kid, coaching him, helping him through this. And so I can rewrite the response from shut down to, let's see if we can give some facts and help the process so the house doesn't burn down.
Scott, that's actually really fascinating, because I was going to ask, because you were talking about the walking down the dark alley. I was curious, like, if somebody would have jumped out, or like if you've ever been mugged or in a fight, like, are you processing these emotions, or is this one of those, like, ineffective, I'm not scared, or is that where you just kind of shut down? And
I would, in that kind of situation, I would just shut down, and I might freeze. And in that kind of situation, it's either fight or flight is the appropriate response. The inappropriate response is freezing. Right? It's going to depend on the situation. And so, part of the process, and what happens is this initial response that we learned when I was 5 becomes the basis for all future interactions in a similar setting. Okay, so if I can rewrite that base, then the futures start to unravel. And so now I get an appropriate response as, so the equivalent for that, this probably happened about 15 years ago, was visiting my mother in California, and she had a big friend that came over. He was 6'6". I'm 6 foot, so we're talking about, I'm used to looking down on people and not looking up. Anyway, so he triggers this response, and I'm like, I can't talk, and just it's that freeze response. I've undone it since then, but so we take these early experiences, and then they manifest in situations where it's inappropriate. That might have been an appropriate response at age 5 to shut down. It's not an appropriate one when you're 30.
Scott, you told me, like, you're a programmer, right?
Yeah.
And I'm seeing, like, I'm an ex-engineer. I don't really do it anymore, but it seems like you wrote a program for your life, right? And it's like the if-then scenarios, right? If this happens, then you go through this loop. If this, and
Sure.
and then just the more things that you learn, you just add in a new if-then scenario. Like, oh, if they say this, then okay, like, that's cool. You're just constantly kind of writing your own code.
Yeah. So most people. And everybody does this in various different forms, but mine's like on hyperactivity. So when you pull up to a stoplight, and it's green, to push down on the accelerator. If it's red, you push down on the brake, right? Okay. So it's a kind of an internal set of rules that says, here's how you respond to the world. And this it's just occurring in the deepest resources of the subconscious. So it's a set of rules that we follow. The difference is that I'm checking, most people would check, 5 or 10 rules in a situation. I'm checking 100. So it's this, you're right. That's exactly what happens. And some of that's just because I am high functioning. So I have the mental capacity to be able to do that. But also the Asperger's forces me to do that, because I have to go through all these rules. It's like, I walk up to the door and I got to decide whether I'm going to turn the handle right or left. Well, last time I turned it right, so this time I turn it left. It's like, it's those kind of weird, kind of mini rules that are, patterns and such. We all go through them. I'm not saying that I'm unique in that. The difference is the number of them that go in there.
So it's funny you say some of these. So I see myself, I'm a pretty relaxed, easygoing guy, right?
Yep.
But then I have things that I can't, like, there are certain ways things are done.
Yeah.
So, like, for me, Monday's laundry day. I love laundry day, right? Sure. It lets me go in, and there's a process, right? Boom, boom, boom. It's like super time blocking for me.
Yep.
But for me, so like I deal more with shiny object syndrome. Like it's easy for me to get distracted.
Sure.
So by having set times, right, that beeps, and then I'm also big into efficiency. I have an hour to get XYZ done. Go.
Right.
Before it beeps again.
Right.
And I do the folding, and all the socks have to match and be put away. And like there's a way that things work.
Right.
If they don't match, they go into a spot where mismatched socks go. Right. You do not put those into the drawer. It doesn't approach.
Yep.
But all my clothes go in on hangers. They have to be white hangers. They go in an order. There's just a way that this works.
Right.
But then when you see other stuff, you're like, dude, you're just kind of just. And it's like, yes, but I think it's because I keep a lot of my home systems particular, so I can be more relaxed in other situations. So
imagine that being everything in your entire life. That's Asperger's.
So let me ask you this, Scott. Here's a fun question for you. Do you consider this a blessing or a curse?
Yes. There's definite advantages to it, because like I said, I can deal with large scale systems, and it helps me keep things organized. I am pretty much a systems kind of person. Now, for the most part, those are here rather than, here on the computer, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Although I do try to get those, if I need to translate it to somebody else, it needs to be in electronic form or something like that. The curse is that, that it's like, you use the example of coming out of the shower. Okay, so the first thing I do is wipe my glasses because there's steam on it. Then I have to do the deodorant. Then I have to brush my teeth. And then I have to comb my hair. Oops, I can't do that. Can't comb my hair yet because I haven't put the shirt on. I have to go through the sequence. And if I get interrupted, the whole sequence fails. I really kind of have to actually walk through the sequence again from the beginning. Now, I can do it mentally. So it's like, okay, glasses, deodorant. Now I brush my teeth, and now I put the shirt on. So if my wife comes in and asks me a whole bunch of questions, so I completely distracted because I can have that push down stack of here's what I was doing, what step I was at. But if she completely disrupts that, then I have to start the whole sequence all over again, and that's the curse part of it.
So do you like watching like shows like Big Bang Theory where there's like a Sheldon or somebody else who has their own particular...
No, I actually don't like that show because it's too familiar.
Well, I was wondering if it would be something you could relate to or if it was...
Oh, I relate to it. And it's not that good example, by the way. There's an awful lot of things that are inconsistent with his described prognosis, but it's close enough that it just like, ugh. I don't want to be reminded. It's like a smoker who's quit can't be around people that smoke.
Yep,
same kind of deal.
Same deal. That's awesome. So let's tie. So with Asperger's, right? And here you are as an investor. So when you buy houses, are you buying to buy, fix, sell? Are they rentals? Are you wholesaling? What side of the investing are you doing?
Well, so over the years, we've done everything. Literally, the only thing in real estate that we haven't done is buy and sell notes, which are buy and sell mortgages. We create notes because we're hard money lenders. And so we create all these notes, create the mortgages because, we're loaning to investors and the investor against the property. So we need to have some kind of collateral. So, but everything else, we've done fix and flips, we've done wholesaling. Our primary methodology has been rentals. We buy them, fix them up, and then rent them out. And when we first started, We made, we went gangbusters. And since then, we've slowed down quite a bit. Now we're not motivated buyers. When we first started, we were motivated buyers. We had to buy. It's like you got to get another property. Got to get another property. Now we're opportunistic buyers. So if a good opportunity shows up, we're going to take it.
So let me go into what I just kind of saw in your situation. So in our case, right, we have three main tenets, right? The most important real estate is between your ears. Your personal drives your professional. It's all about relationships. When we talk about relationships, there's three areas: relationship with self, others, and then things. So talking about the Asperger, so that's a relationship with yourself, right? That is something that
I work a lot on that.
Well, in my classification of that, that's like relationship with your mind, right? Like the way you process, the way you think, and that is a struggle until you find the key, right? And then as you learn that, then you're able to apply it to all these other things.
Right.
Which, if I look at this, so you're probably able to consume bunches of information, right? Probably very knowledgeable about that other stuff. Where it struggles is probably the relationship with others, right? So some of that back and forth.
Well, so you talked about finding the key. I was able to find the key to that. Before the door was seriously locked. But now, and that's why when I say I have Asperger's, people go, huh? Because I was able to unlock that door.
Actually, how did you find the key? Like, what was it?
Well, it was literally incremental. It was like every time I would interact with somebody, I would go, was this successful? Was this not successful? And if it wasn't successful, my red flag would go off. And then I would try to figure out what happened. So I, post-analyze. And you keep doing that. And every time you post-analyze, if you fix even the smallest thing, you're moving forward. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. Well, I had a lot of steps.
So after, especially early on, I did a end of action report, right? So I flipped a house. Hey, what were the goods? What were the bads?
Right.
Well, I tried to self-perform too much of this, and it worked when I brought in and I started asking for help. People came in and got it done. Ask for help earlier. Like sometimes when you write this stuff down, it's like, oh, it looks so easy. We'll just knock that out in a week or so. It's like, okay, come on. That's not very realistic because we have, like, Kevin, you're not, 20 anymore. Your body doesn't work like this. It's like, oh, that's right. It doesn't.
Yes.
It hurts to bend down.
Right. Exactly.
But then the other part that seems like it makes sense is the way you process, right? Programming, logic, systems shows why the rental side is good, right? The money, the numbers, the metrics. It also shows why creating notes and getting into hard money also makes sense. So, you could have your personal interactions, but you're able to churn and look at ROIs and values, and not necessarily dealing with so I talk about the 5 Ds of distress, right? If you're looking at being a wholesaler and getting the best low deal, well, you got to be talking with people with distress, right? Loss of a loved one, loss of a job, disease, there's something that's going on that they're hurting, where, are those cases where you're good to come in and talk to those people?
Somewhat. I focus more on the technology. My initial interactions with people a lot of times are poor. So once I've dealt with somebody for a while, then the interaction gets better because I'm trying to read them and, are they, detail oriented? Are they superficial? Are they, do they have a lot of depth? Are they shallow? Are they, a driver or using the leadership boardroom scale with the metrics there, Are they a driver or are they a collaborator? They want somebody to kind of hold their hands or tell them that's the direction you need to go and step out of their way. And so as I interact with somebody, I get those metrics, and so then I know how to work with them. Early on, I discovered that I was not too bad at the sales technique called mirroring.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, if someone is talking really slow, then I slow my pace down. If somebody's talking really fast, then I pick up my pace and those kind of things. And so, those are skills that helped me smooth the edges so that I wasn't so prickly. And
one of the reasons I like real estate is we can find where we fit in. It's big enough that there's all these different niches.
yeah,
So like for me, it's easy to go in, be empathetic, and help these people make a good decision, right? Professional problem solving is something I call it.
Yep.
You're going in, but it's one of those like, I can feel when you're having a conversation like, oh, that's the button. Like that's,
yep.
But you're able to find where you fit. You can do these other segments, but you really thrive in these other ones.
Yeah.
And just spend that time working on yourself to understand the key so you could go out and plug it in other places.
Yeah.
I got to back out here. So you're married. Does your wife, did she know that you were on the spectrum when she started with you?
Well, yes and no. Yes, in that I was weird.
Join the club, man.
Right, yeah.
We got t-shirts. Yeah.
And she had some issues too. We've worked through these things over the years. I mean, we've been married 44 years.
Congratulations.
And so we've had some chances to kind of, we've grown up together is the best way to think of it.
Yeah.
So she was very tolerant of my weirdness. And I was tolerant of her weirdness. I mean, hey, let's be honest, we're human beings. And so was able to understand me in a way even that my own mother couldn't, because she really never understood the Asperger's at all. And it wasn't until probably about 8 years ago that I took this test of the various different ways. And now I had a label. And what was interesting was once you had the label, then it's like, oh, that's why I do that. Oh, that's why I do that. That's why I can't do that. And, et cetera. And it eased my process. I read a book when I was in 5th grade during my parents' divorce. It's a book called I'm Okay, You're Okay. And basically my conclusion out of that was the book was okay. It was not a particularly good book, but my conclusion was that I was broken because the Asperger's was manifesting. And, there weren't any labels. So all I know was that I wasn't functioning very well. It was broken, but that I could fix myself. So that early, there was this decision that I could fix myself. I didn't know how, and I knew that I didn't know how, but I knew that it was possible, and that it was just, okay, so I can fix this little piece. I can fix this little piece. I can fix this little piece. And after a while, fixing those pieces start to get to the point where everything's fixed. And then about 6 years ago, I said, hey, wait a minute, I'm not broken anymore. And so
it's gotta be awesome. So like we did chat before and I was like, man, like if you wouldn't have told me or we wouldn't have talked about it, it wouldn't have been on my thoughts of asking about this stuff. But I think it's fascinating. I also just love seeing how people work. This is one of those this is total processing. This is total mind stuff.
Yeah, it is. It meshes with what you do. I mean, because we can't fix other people. We have to deal with the world the way it is. I mean, sometimes we can push back, but we can only fix, our reactions to things. We live in a world that is doing things. And right now, I think it's extra weird.
Yeah.
That's a good
You don't
tangent.
have to be on the spectrum. This is weird times, man.
Very weird times. And, so the only thing we can fix is ourselves. And we really only can fix our reaction to things. So, so one of the things that I did want to bring up is that I do coach.
Mm-hmm.
Since I learned all these techniques to fix myself, then I I bring a lot of tools to the table. So when I talk with somebody and maybe I'll use an example that I use a lot, and that is that some people have trouble picking up the phone, making phone calls. Not everybody, just some people. And so, there are some techniques to how to deal with that. Well, maybe you don't have that particular problem, so I'll put that tool, aside. Or maybe I'll take that tool and you're having trouble leaving the house. Well, it's kind of similar, so I use that tool in a different fashion. So I bring to the coaching all these tools that I've had to learn to fix myself. And some of the tools I've learned, we talked about Chuck earlier. I learned some tools and some techniques from him. Tools and techniques are kind of interchangeable, on how to deal with certain situations that I've never encountered, that I don't have, it's not part of my history, but because I learned how to do tools and techniques, that's one more technique that I can add to the tool belt, because people do that, whatever that is. And so I love coaching. I love the one-on-one aspects, very personalized. I do, obviously, because I'm an informationaholic, have created a bunch of courses. So, if you want to learn about real estate from A to Z, I got one of those. If you want to learn about lending, I got one of those, et cetera. And so, that becomes part of the coaching package. But I love what I do. I get paid for playing. I don't work very hard anymore. I probably, if you don't take the networking into account, because I do a lot of networking, breakfasts for the REIAs and such, I probably work about 20 hours a week. And if you add in the networking, it probably adds another 15 hours a week. I love eating, so. and being a member of two different REIAs, we've got, a weekly breakfast at each one of them, and yada, 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 yada. And so,
I want to go back to something you brought up earlier. We've Coach Chuck. So in the first 5, we call them the monologues. Chuck was a instrumental in my life, right? He was one of the people who was able to come in and see through whatever facade I had and talk like he saw me.
Yes.
And you also had that with him. So can you go back and describe your relationship with Chuck a little bit?
I always felt like that Chuck, that he and I had a connection of, that he understood me, and that the way it was presented, the way I interpreted it, and hearing other people have experienced the same thing, is that he and I were similar. That while he didn't have Asperger's per se, he had issues that communicating, and that there was a special connection there. And having seen, I talked to you and talked to, I know a lot of people from the common groups, that most of them had the same kind of sense. I think part of that's that Chuck was a really good mirror. It's one of those sales techniques where we match the other person. But I also think that Chuck was was emotionally honest and connected. So, and I'm not sure, he brought us into the Life and Air years ago. We've been in Life and Air and then Leadership Boardroom at least 8 years. I lose track of time. As you get older, time perspective changes, and COVID did a really number on it. So I've got things that my wife will say, "Oh yeah, that happened 3 months ago," and I was like, "That was 3 years ago." It's like, no, it wasn't. It was 3 months ago. So I'm a little off on the time scales, but and so there's been this long-term connection with Chuck, and that's the kind of thing that I think that I try to bring to anybody that I coach, is to find out who they are, what they're about, and help people where they are. I know where they want to be, because that's the first thing, is to create a vision statement. As far as the coaching, that's literally the first assignment. And then once they have the vision statement, I can see where they want to go. And then we start talking about where they are. And, so I know one end point and I know the other end point. How do we get from point A to point B? And it's amazing when you actually write a vision statement, how quickly that vision statement occurs. And I mean, having been in these types of events, the leadership boardroom specifically, that with a good vision statement, I know a number of people that were like, "Oh no, I know exactly what my vision statement is. It's right here. It's right here," and but they're not changing. And then when they finally say, "Okay, fine, you've bugged me enough. I'll write the vision statement down and get it in paper and put it in the right format and all that," then all of a sudden, 6 months later, they're like different people, because they've organized their lives in a way that they're moving forward. And I've seen people go. One of the people in the Life and Air side of things had $6 million worth of debt, and in 3 years had $6 million sitting in the bank.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, whoa. I mean, they did some pretty massive changes. So
massive action, right?
Yeah, they took massive action, and so. But being part of a mastermind, being part of coaching, I think all successful people that are of any kind of personal success. I mean, there's some business success where people don't do it. They all have a coach.
Yep. So one thing why I brought Chuck up is it's the legacy of leadership, right? His care, his love, his passion, his fingerprints are part of my life. So then all of my students have a little bit of that in them, and just like you, part of Chuck, his leadership, his relationship is in you, and now all of your students, all of your impact are benefiting from some of that. It's one of those pieces of passion. Like once you have it, you're like, oh my gosh, this is great.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes it's a word, an action, just a feeling you get that's what you want to leave with somebody else. I work with some of the kids in the high schools, and it's like, I don't know if they'll remember me in 10 years, 20 years, or maybe a few of them will. And it'll be whatever seed was planted that they're like, man, I wanted to become an investor, or I wanted to be a coach because of this one day, this one guy came in and talked about blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. And you get those folks that'll come back 5 years later and go, you made a significant difference in my life. And, that's the reward.
And it's bigger than, any paycheck or anything like that. Don't get me wrong, those are good. Yeah. But having those other moments are, you're just like, yes, freaking cloud nine on these things. So Scott, we do got to wrap up. I want to honor your time on this one.
Thank you.
I do want to what advice could you give somebody, especially with Asperger's or something where you feel like you're just battling yourself? Like, why am I broken? Like this feeling of broken. Some people have it because of bad relationships or,
lots of different causes for sure.
But yours was basically you were battling your brain in your own actions.
Yes.
Like, how could you give some advice to people like that to become successful, right? To have a good life, not to mention to get into investing. Like, do you have any advice for somebody like that?
Keep fixing. We're all broken in different ways. And as you encounter situations where the response didn't work the way it should have, pick it apart. Look at why it broke down. Was it because you got angry when you should have been compassionate? The technique that I use when I do that is I go back, I analyze the earliest situation, because the emotional energy is less than the immediate situation. So I can analyze and break down that earlier situation. But that's my approach. That's the one I use. And understand it's a process. It's fixing it a little bit at a time.
Would you say people with Asperger's can be successful in real estate?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
Right. I think anyone can be successful as long as they don't self-sabotage.
Good.
You need both pieces. You need the education, the knowledge, and the action, and not sabotage yourself, because it's so easy.
So, Scott, if somebody wanted to get more Scott, where can they follow you? Where can they see you, etc., or find your coaching?
So, my website will give you a copy of how to write a vision statement is howtohackrealestate.com. I figure I combine real estate and computers. howtohackrealestate.com/vision. And, it's a minor ethical bribe, because I want your email.
Hey, it's fine.
That's what that's, but you get I think a pretty good document on how to start to write a vision statement.
Good. And then your REIAs and the OREIA and all this other stuff. So, man, it's great. Great to see what you're doing, Scott. I totally appreciate you jumping on with us today. Just opening up your lives and sharing it with us is fantastic. Are you on the socials, like the Facebook, the Instagrams?
Yep. I've got. I'm not on Instagram. I probably should be. I'm on Facebook, Scott Krusemark. I'll make sure you get the right one, because there's a couple of them out there, and there's one spam one, and on LinkedIn.
Okay.
So.
Wonderful. Hey, Scott, thank you for being on and kind of sharing your life and your story with us. Good luck to your journey, and hopefully I'll see you at OREIA this year.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to see you.
Awesome. Hey, good to have you. Nice kind of sharing some of the Chuck stories. So it's cool to see the impact that many people have had. So, Scott, thank you so much. Talk soon.
All right. Take care.
I don't know about you, but I love that conversation with Scott. So, Scott, just the relationship with his brain, thought about being broken, he didn't use the word tics, but having those little OCD things, right? So I can relate to some of those. But, he has he does his own ways of doing things. But instead of that being just a curse or something he has to live with, he is able to keep honing in his system, right? He's able to learn how to do this a little bit better, or cut this in or cut that out, or don't go over there. So it's just kind of neat to see how he does that. And then with his coaching, right, the A to Z coaching, what we talked about in the show and out of it, but he has like a little pocket of things I wouldn't have even thought about, just like leaving the house or starting the phone call. For me, it's not a big deal to pick up the phone and call somebody. Like, that's one of the things that are easy for me, right? Or to go through the grocery store. And go knock on people's doors. That is not necessarily a hard thing, but for somebody more like him, that would be a lot harder, right? Because he doesn't pick up on some of these other cues. He doesn't get some of those other things, but he basically wrote a program for himself to be able to deal with these things. So I think that's great. And also just have to go back and say how much I love the concept that Chuck was also his coach. So he was Chuck for many, many years. Chuck spoke into his and his wife's lives. And it's just kind of neat when you see some of the people that has been influenced by a good coach or mentor like Chuck. So it's just kind of cool to see that and see the legacy living in and how he's passing that on to others. So guys, hopefully you love this week. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk with you guys soon.